All right, we're back in Yoda land, I guess, the planet of Dagobah, whatever. So I'm asking, what sort of language does Yoda speak, or at least how does he speak English? And so we can look at his examples. So he says, "My home this is," or to Obi-Wan, "You listen." And hopefully this is a little bit obvious, but this is the subject of the sentence. Is the verb, and my home is something functioning basically like the object, or you listen. Subject, verb to Obi-Wan is the object, or at least it's fitting into that sort of complement slot for the verb. In these cases, he's speaking something that looks like an OSV language, object, subject, verb. Which again is not a very common type of language. So kind of like Klingon, this is supposed to sound not very naturally human, even though it's still possibly human, and we can still understand, right? So in these sentences, the complement of the verb moves to the front of the sentence, and then other cases, he's actually moving more than just the complement of the verb. He moves the complement of the auxiliary verb. So help you, I can. The whole verb phrase moves to the front, or take you to him, I will. The whole verb phrase moves to the front as well. And if you've been playing around with those phrase structure tests of movement, maybe you've already produced sentences like this and realized that they can work, right? So with that in mind, I want to sort of focus for the rest of this lecture on what happens when things move in syntax. So in addition to phrase structure rules, which we've talked about at some length, there are also movement rules that can explain syntactic patterns in language that the phrase structure rules alone can't account for. So we're going to look at sort of systematic relationships that we can get between different types of sentences to sort of formulate what these rules do, or at least what they operate on. And an easy way to walk into this is by looking at the differences between statements and questions, at least the syntactic differences between the two. So you might have a statement or a declarative sentence like, "The boy is sleeping." And if you want to turn that into a question, you can say, "Is the boy sleeping?" At least this is what we call a yes-no question, because the answer to this question would be either yes or no, right? We can look at another one. "The boy has slept." Has the boy slept? "The boy can sleep." Can the boy sleep? "The boy will sleep." Will the boy sleep? I've just kind of paused for a question a second ago or a minute ago, so I'm not going to pause again, but at least not going to stop the video again, but I will pause here and say, can you explain or describe what sort of is happening in going from the declarative sentence to the interrogative sentence? There's something in common that all these sentences or pairs of sentences share. What is it? How do you make it a question? Well, hopefully this has jumped out at you by now, but if you take a look at another one. "The boy did sleep." Did the boy sleep? What's going on is we're moving this verb here, the auxiliary verb, to the front of the sentence out of its original slot in the middle. So the way we can get that is we can get a sentence like, "The boy is sleeping," from our basic phrase structure rules. This looks like a lot, very similar to the structures we've seen before. So we have a noun, phrase, subject in the specifier slot of the tense phrase. We've got an explicit auxiliary verb filling in that T slot, and then its complement is the VP, sleeping. And because it's in progressive form, is has to be kind of matched up with an ing affix on the verb, but we're not going to worry about that too much. We can get the corresponding interrogative sentence, "Is the boy sleeping?" by doing what is called inverting the order of the subject and the auxiliary. So the subject comes first before the auxiliary, but in the question, the auxiliary verb is going to come first. So the way we represent that in syntax is we're actually going to expand up higher from the TP at the top of the sentence. So previously, we could just stop at the tense phrase node and say this is a complete sentence by itself. When we form a question out of this, we project it up even higher. So the TP becomes a complement of this C bar node, which is something we saw earlier when we had the sentences embedded in other sentences, except this one isn't embedded in another sentence. It's going to become a question. So at the highest level, we have a complementizer phrase, then it goes down to a C bar, and that has two sister or daughter nodes, a complementizer slot and a tense phrase slot, which at this point hasn't changed. But what we're going to do is take advantage of this C slot here, and we're going to move this auxiliary is into that C slot right there. is the boy sleeping? And this is no longer going to appear in that particular part of the sentence. And this is the way you create what is called a yes/no question. Is the boy sleeping? Yes or no? Okay. I'm going to point out before we move on to slightly more complex structures that the movement we're making here is a movement from one head slot, the tense head of this tense phrase, to another head slot, this complementizer slot of the complementizer phrase. So that might help you remember where things go when they do move, because we're going to see a different kind of movement here in a second. I'm also going to mention 2 little footnotes about how to notate this when you're actually drawing up a syntactic tree. And I'll walk you through a couple of examples in practice exercise set number 4, 2, in a different video. But the C slot, in order to make this inversion happen, the C slot has to be marked with this feature of plus Q, which is sort of functioning like the feature we saw before of like plus past or minus past. This is just saying this is a question. So when you move this up here to the front, you can put an is in here, and then you should also put a plus Q to denote that that Q feature attracted the is up into the complementizer slot. You also need to make a little note of where the is used to be. And what you put in there is a lowercase t, and if you're typing it out, you can italicize it, which is how it's normally represented. But this stands for a trace. So the is used to be there, then it moved out and it left behind a little trace, a little footstep of where it used to be before it moved. And that means that nothing else can be in that T slot. It's just kind of empty, but has memory, like a broken-hearted lover, I guess. All right. Anyways, the syntactic rules we've seen so far are phrase structure rules. So I'm not going to walk through all these again, but like a noun phrase becoming a determiner and a noun bar and bar, so on and so forth. We've gone through those at great length. We're going to get a new set of rules here, which are called transformational rules, which generate one kind of sentence on the basis of another that already exists or that can be generated by those phrase structure rules. So these give us kind of our foundation, and we can mess around with them a little bit with these transformational rules. So for instance, if we have a declarative sentence, we can get a yes/no question out of that for free, so long as our phrase structure rules generate the corresponding declarative sentence to begin with. Okay, so let's look at a couple more complex cases of how we derive questions. So let's say we have a declarative sentence, the chicken crossed the road. And if you thought about it, how would our rule for creating an interrogative sentence work for this particular question? I'm not going to pause here. I'm not going to stop the video. I'm going to pause it in a minute, I think. So I'll just let you think about this for a second. The chicken crossed the road. How do you make that into a yes/no question? Well, could you say, do what we did before we had the boy is sleeping? Is the boy sleeping? Can you say, crossed the chicken the road? Maybe you can, but I don't think most English speakers would do that. Instead, you would probably say something like, did the chicken cross the road? And we're actually doing something extra here. We're adding another step to make this work. So the thing that's appearing here, which was not there before, is this did. So the chicken crossed the road. There's no did in there, but all of a sudden when we create a question, we say, did the chicken cross the road? This is in the past tense. This is no longer in the past tense, but this is. So what we're doing is actually adding an auxiliary verb do before we create a question out of this. I'll go back to those examples just a second ago. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah. So all 5 of these had an explicit auxiliary verb in that T slot: is, has, can, will, did, so on and so forth. If you just have the chicken cross the road, then you don't have an explicit auxiliary there. You would just have, say, that plus past feature if we wrote this out in a syntactic tree form. So to actually make this rule work, you need to add a auxiliary verb first before you can invert the order of the subject and the auxiliary verb to create the question. So the chicken crossed the road, and you can convert that to the chicken did cross the road. This is a different kind of transformational rule. So this auxiliary is going to take on the tense features that we saw just in the main verb before. And then after that, now that you have an auxiliary, you can just move it to the front like we've seen with the other example sentences. Did the chicken cross the road? So an extra step gets added in there. In English, you can't invert non-auxiliary verbs like crossed or basically any other kind of verb except for like is, have, can, could, so on and so forth that we saw before. If you go back to like Shakespeare's time, back in the old days, they could actually still invert non-auxiliary verbs, and maybe they could, maybe Romeo could say chicken or cross the chicken the road. Who knows why he would? But those are cases that no longer obtain in English. We can't do this anymore. We have to have an auxiliary verb there to make this transformation work. So further terminology, these correspond to the sort of phrase structure rules and the transformational rules levels we saw before, but the phrase structure rules and the textbook will refer to this as a collection of rules known as merge. Those will create what's called the deep structure of a sentence, and the transformational rules, which the book collapses into a category known as move, those rules can change the deep structure into what's called the surface structure that we see in interrogative sentences. So there's kind of an underlying form, and then that gets converted into something you can actually see on the surface, the specific word order you get. And you can kind of think about this with analogy to phonology. I didn't talk explicitly in phonology about underlying and surface representations. You can read more about that in the textbook if you want. But you can think of the underlying representation as like the phoneme, like, this abstract representation of like a T, and then maybe on the surface you get something different like a flap or an aspirated T or something like that. So this is kind of phoneme level for the deep structure and like phonetic level for the surface structure. Same sort of pattern we see. I'm not going to dwell on that too much, but I do want to say that when you go from a deep structure to a surface structure in either syntax or phonology, you have to apply what's called a derivation. So basically a series of rules which apply each to the output of the other until you get to the final surface structure at the end, which is what you can see on the surface as a listener, or basically here is on the surface as a listener. So in these derivations, you get more than one rule. On the previous slide, we saw a couple. We add the do as an auxiliary verb, and then we invert it to the front of the sentence. You can get more than that, though. It gets pretty complicated pretty quickly. So I'll give you another example. So Bob said the chicken crossed the road. So how can we make a yes/no question out of this? It turns out, I'll pause here for a second. I don't think I will stop the video after all, but Bob said that the chicken crossed the road. How do you make a yes/no question out of that? One way is to say, did Bob say that the chicken crossed the road? So you can add a did in here. Bob did say that the chicken crossed the road. And then you can move the did to the front and say, did Bob say that the chicken crossed the road? One option that you almost certainly didn't think about at all is to put the sort of auxiliary do in here like we did before. Bob said that the chicken did cross the road. And you can still do that. That works fine. But what we can't do is extract that did out of it and say something like, did Bob said that the chicken crossed the road? That's really bad syntactically. So we're going to put a star there and forget about it, or at least forget about saying it, but also try to learn a little bit of a lesson from this failure. So why does this not work? It turns out that we can only form yes/no questions from the highest level from this matrix clause here. So we can only invert an auxiliary verb at this highest level to the front of the sentence. You can't get it out of this embedded sentence from the chicken crossed the road in this case. Why is that? It turns out that what we want to do, remember, actually go back briefly and remind you that we have an auxiliary verb coming from the head T of this tense phrase, and we move it to this head C of the complementizer phrase. If you have an embedded sentence, though, you already have that little word that in this complementizer node. Bob said that the chicken crossed the road, so on and so forth. That is already here. So if you try to get the auxiliary verb out of this tense slot up into a higher level, it's going to get blocked it gets stuck because it can't get through that's already in the sentence. And that's why it doesn't work. Yep, so the complementizer that fills the C slot and prevents the embedded auxiliary from moving up. Okay, last kind of example I'll give you. Here's a different relationship we see between sentences. You can have a declarative sentence like Bart kicked the ball, and you could also say, what did Bart kick? We can create a variety of different kinds of interrogative sentences this way, some more interesting than others. So Lisa put the leash on the table. Where did Lisa put the leash? We also have Marge sent a card to Selma. Who did Marge send a card to? And I'll pause here and say, maybe if you're speaking really formal English, you might prefer to say, to whom did Marge send a card? But I think most people, when saying this sort of question, would just say, who did Marge send a card to? We'll just focus on this type of structure for now. But you notice that, well, we're using different WH kind of words here. So these are called WH questions. So we've got what, where, who. There's a variety of other ones like why, when, how, so on and so forth. How, the WH is still there, just in a different order. Doesn't matter that much. How do we form these questions, though, is kind of the operative question for the rest of this lecture. So we see some elements that we saw before. We see this did here, even though it wasn't in the original sets of declarative sentences. But then we're also adding this WH form crucially at the very beginning of the question. Okay, so how do we do this? So the first step is that we substitute some phrase within the underlying sentence with a WH form. So if you have like an impersonal noun phrase like the ball, which is not a human being, then you replace it with what. If you do have a personal noun phrase like Selma or Bart or whoever, you can replace that with who. If you have a prepositional phrase that describes a location, you can replace it with where, so on and so forth. It's just that going from the declarative sentence to this step, you just replace that phrase with a WH form. So Bart kicked the ball, and you can say Bart kicked what? Or Lisa put the leash on the table. Lisa put the leash where? We're just replacing that prepositional phrase with where. I'll mention here that these forms are called echo questions. So I could say perhaps to you out of the blue, Bart kicked the ball, and you might say, Bart kicked what? If you were surprised that he kicked the ball and not something else, like, I don't know, the table. So you can also say, Lisa put the leash where, if you didn't hear me the first time. These work as sentences on their own. They're just not really WH questions as we normally think of them. Okay, so the second step is the one we've seen before. So if we want to have auxiliary subject inversion here, we need to get an auxiliary verb in there somehow. So we say Bart did kick what? We replace the kicked with a did kick, and then we move the did to the front of the sentence. So did Bart kick what? Lisa put the leash where? There's a kind of a step here I'm glossing over a bit. Lisa did put the leash where? Did Lisa put the leash where is kind of this intermediate step. And then the very last step that we need to worry about is moving the WH word from where it is in the lower structure of the sentence to the front of the entire question. So you go from did Bart kick what to what did Bart kick? Or did Lisa put the leash where to where did Lisa put the leash? So we're moving not just an auxiliary verb here, but also two things, because we're also moving a WH form to the beginning of the sentence in every single one of these examples. What did Bart kick? And where did Lisa put the leash? So we need to have two spots for things to move to when we create these sorts of questions. So I've got this underlined form here, actually after the second step here. So I've got Bart did kick what? The original form might be Bart kicked what? So I've added the did in this slot for the auxiliary verb. And it's taken on the tense of the verb as well because it's in past tense, and this is now in its present or infinitival form. I've also replaced this noun phrase, what? Bart kicked the ball. You can replace the ball with what? So we got Bart did kick what at this stage of the derivation, and we just need things to move at this point. So we can move the did, again, from the head of the TP to the head of the CP there. And we leave a trace behind. as it just makes that movement. So did Bart kick what? We also want to move the what up to the front. So that's also going to leave a trace behind, and it's going to make this movement kind of around our previous movement. So this one goes from a head slot to another head slot. This one goes from a not head slot, it's the complement here, to a not head slot over here. It's a specifier. So if you do that correctly, your two movements, they will both leave traces behind, but they won't cross paths with each other. So this one kind of is the interior move, and this one is the exterior move from sort of the end to the very beginning of the sentence. Okay, hopefully that makes sense, but I'm going to walk you through some practice exercises where we do that as well. And otherwise, that's all I'm going to say about WH movement for the time being. I will say a word or two, though, about questions and question formation around the world in other languages. So in other languages, you can move any verb, not just an auxiliary, to the beginning of the sentence. We can see this in Dutch. Like I said, back in like Shakespeare's day, you could do this more often in English. But in Dutch, you can say things like Femke leest veel boeken. Again, I don't speak Dutch very well either, but hopefully that's in the neighborhood. That means Femke reads many books. And you can also say in Dutch, leest Femke veel boeken, and that will mean reads Femke many books, literally, but that's how you actually say, does Femke read many books? So in Dutch, they can just grab this non-auxiliary verb, move it to the front. In English, we need to add the auxiliary verb does and move that to the front and leave read back where it began. There's also other languages that form WH questions without moving anything. So to go to Japanese again, we can say Taro ga nani o mitsuketa no. And so this is Taro, subject, and we've seen this before, found, and this is the object of the sentence. And so the word for what in Japanese is nani. So we replace the object, I can't remember what he found before, but we replace that with the word what. And then you just leave it there, and that's a WH question. You don't need to move it to the front of the sentence. So this is like going through part of the derivation of our WH questions, but not all of it. Swahili, a totally unrelated language to Japanese, just so happens to have a WH form that looks a lot like nani in Japanese. It's also nani, but it means who. So ulipatia nani kitabu means you gave who a book, or at least that's what it means in the literal syntactic order. But the question form would be, who did you give a book? So if you want to ask about who, you just leave it there where it started in the sentence. You just change it to a WH form. Okay, so you don't have to do all the things we do in English to create a WH question. So there's differences between languages at the syntactic level. They have different options for how they can form questions and sentences, so on and so forth. So just the general breakdown, big scheme of things, language has universal features, and they are called principles. So these are universal features like nouns, verbs, so on and so forth, and phrases with heads and complements. Every single language is going to have that. We think of that as sort of our universal endowment of language that we have just as human beings. It's part of the way our minds work. But then in addition to that, individual languages can have options which are called parameters. So is it a head first language like English, or is it a head last language like Japanese? Does it have WH movement like English or no WH movement like Swahili? These are things which are options which languages can or cannot do if they want to. And when a kid learns a language, that kid has to figure out what these parameters are. The kid gets this stuff for free and then kind of flips switches to sort of match up with what the language around them is doing when they grow up. So that's all I'm going to say about language for now, but different languages operate in different fashions, and that's the best way to kind of explain it while still maintaining our understanding of what's universal about language and part of universal grammar. Okay, I'm going to pause there for now, and I will add one more syntax lecture about the last set of practice exercises, probably tomorrow, not today. See you then.